There's a war being waged against masculinity in this industry, and I don't say that as a slogan or a rallying cry. I say it as an observation that I think anyone paying attention can verify for themselves. Because there is a brand of commentary operating in gaming right now that is genuinely, measurably dangerous. Not because it's loud, but because it's institutional. A strain of toxic femininity that hides behind performative morality and borrowed academic language and distorted frameworks from political science and psychology to do something very specific. To take the most fundamental, biologically hardwired instincts that men carry, the instinct to protect, to provide, to shelter the vulnerable, and redefine them as expressions of dominance, as performances of power, as symptoms of a sickness that needs to be corrected. And since the launch of Pragmata, this machinery has reared its ugly head with an intensity that I think demands a response. From anonymous accounts on X calling every man who played this game a predator, to major Twitch streamers dismissing fatherhood as an incel fantasy, to, and this is the part that elevates it from noise to something genuinely alarming, the editor-in-chief of one of gaming's most widely read publications publishing an institutional editorial that treats the male protective instinct as a power fantasy and calls for consequences against the men who felt it. And that escalation, from social media to streaming to legacy press, is not random. It's the architecture of how these narratives get laundered from fringe ideology into mainstream institutional authority. Here's what I mean. Anthropologist David Gilmour conducted the first exhaustive cross-cultural study of masculinity across every inhabited continent and published his findings in a landmark work called Manhood in the Making. And what he found was that in virtually every society on Earth, from agricultural villages to industrial cities, from pre-modern tribes to advanced democracies, the male code contains the same three imperatives: protect, procreate, and provide. Not because men invented these roles to oppress anyone, but because the biological reality of our species demanded them. Human infants are vulnerable for longer than almost any other animal on the planet, and neuroscience research from Leiden University has confirmed that fathers have evolved specific neural responses to infants in danger. The protective instinct isn't cultural programming. It's hardwired. It's in your brain. It's in your hormones. When a man first holds his child, testosterone levels drop and nurturing hormones rise. Your body is literally reconfiguring itself to protect. And this isn't limited to biological children. Men throughout history have raised children that weren't theirs, built homes for families they inherited, gone to work every day for stepchildren and adopted children and nephews and nieces, without ever needing to be asked or praised for it. Because the drive to protect isn't sentimental, it's structural. It's the quiet, non-negotiable architecture of how men have always operated. None of that mattered to the commentator class, of course, because you don't even need peer-reviewed studies to understand any of this. None of these observations about masculinity are radical or new. Every man watching this already knows them instinctively. Every father knows them. Every grandfather knows them. And every woman who's ever watched a man she loves stand between her child and danger knows them too. Every mother who trusted a husband or a brother or a stranger to carry her kid to safety knows them. This is common sense, so fundamental that the vast majority of human beings who have ever lived would be stunned to learn it's being debated. But after years of being marinated in distorted academic frameworks and weaponized political theory, and an institutional culture that treats male nature as a problem to be solved, a class of commentators has become so ideologically captured that they can look at one of the most basic human dynamics on Earth and see a male power trip. That's what happened with Pragmata, a game about a man named Hugh who finds an android child named Diana in the wreckage of a collapsing world and decides to protect her. It's Atticus and Scout. It's The Road. It's Joel and Ellie. It's Big Daddy and Little Sister in BioShock. It's Lee and Clementine in The Walking Dead. one of the oldest archetypes humanity has ever produced. Millions of people played Pragmata. What the internet now calls dad mode kicked in for a lot of them. That's when the institutional machinery activated. Because, as I mentioned, Stacey Henley, the editor-in-chief of The Gamer, one of the most widely read gaming publications on Earth, published an editorial titled, "Gaming Cannot Allow Pragmata's Diana Fan Club to Flourish." And what this piece does is something that needs to be understood precisely. Because it's not a straightforward condemnation of the genuinely reprehensible content that got subreddits banned. There was real predatory content posted about Diana. There were communities that deserved to be shut down. Nobody is disputing that. But Henley uses that real problem as a Trojan horse. She opens with the legitimate outrage, the banned subreddits, the moderator who quit, the explicit content. And then she pivots. She takes that justified disgust and she extends it to cover every male response to the game. Until, by the end of the article, the men who posted genuinely criminal content and the men who simply responded to a father-daughter story with a protective instinct are presented as two expressions of the same sickness. She admits she hasn't played the game. She describes father-daughter stories as men trying to prove their masculinity through protection. She calls the protective narrative a power fantasy. She says she's tapped out on stories where men adopt daughter-like figures. And she closes by calling for consequences. And these people she wants consequences for isn't just the predators. It's the entire male relationship with this game. And that conflation, treating a man who wants to protect a child as a slightly more presentable version of a man who sexualizes one, is the most dangerous thing in that article. And the arrogance of it is breathtaking. Because Henley describes herself in the piece as, and this is a direct quote, a woke video game journalist. She wears it as a badge. She's proud of the lens. And from behind that lens, she just performed one of the oldest manipulations in ideological journalism. She took a real victim, real children, real safety concerns, and she used them as a shield to advance a completely separate agenda, the pathologization of male protectiveness. And she did it from an editor-in-chief's chair, with editorial authority, with institutional reach, without ever playing the game. And if you want to understand where that arrogance comes from, where someone gets the confidence to conflate protectors with predators and call it journalism, you have to understand the framework she's operating inside. Laura Mulvey wrote Male Gaze Theory in 1975 about cinema, and since then it's metastasized so far beyond its original scope that it's now used to pathologize every form of male emotional expression. Male desire is the male gaze. Male protection is a power fantasy. Male interest in fatherhood has been rebranded by feminist academics as dadification, a term they literally coined to critique father protagonists in games as post-feminist ideology. And inside this framework, there is no version of male emotional life that escapes suspicion. If you find a character attractive, you're objectifying. If you feel protective of a child, you're performing dominance. If you want to be a father, you're reinforcing patriarchal structures. Every single road leads to the same destination. The male protective instinct is always a mask for something darker. And the language sounds academic, and the analysis sounds sophisticated. But what's actually being said, stripped of every piece of jargon, is that men are inherently suspect. And the more visibly they protect, the more suspect they become. And this framework doesn't stay in academic papers. It cascades into editorial offices and streaming platforms and social media feeds until it becomes the ambient assumption of an entire commentator class. And the consequences of that are real, and they reach far beyond gaming. Because research published in the journal Psychology of Men and Masculinities has documented what happens when you spend decades teaching men that their proximity to children is a threat. Male teachers stop comforting crying students. Fathers hesitate before holding their child's hand in public. Men cross the street to avoid walking near a playground because they've learned that their presence will be interpreted as danger. The framework doesn't protect children. It produces a generation of men who've concluded that the safest thing they can do is withdraw. And the cruelest irony is that children suffer most from that withdrawal. Because the research is unambiguous. Children with engaged, present, protective fathers have better outcomes across every measurable dimension of development. And the people who claim to care most about protecting children are actively building a culture that discourages men from doing exactly that. Pragmata's own creators describe their game simply as a guy dreaming of home and a girl seeking a new one. And that's all it ever was. Kindness, trust, innocence. A child being given a home. A man finding purpose in protecting someone smaller than him. Parenthood, hope. Everything that has ever made humanity worth believing in, captured in a single gain. And a class of commentators looked at all of that beauty and dragged it down into the ugliest place imaginable, into power dynamics and dominance frameworks and ideological audits. And that is what breaks my heart about this moment. Not the bad takes, not the Twitter drama, but the realization that there are people whose interior world has become so ugly, whose ideological lens has become so corroded, that they are physically incapable of encountering beauty without reducing it to something as miserable as they are. And the more power these people accumulate, the more of the world starts to look like the inside of their heads. Every story flattened into a power struggle. Every act of kindness interrogated for hidden motives. Every sincere human impulse smeared with the same gray, joyless, paranoid residue, until there's nothing left that's allowed to simply be good. And somewhere on the other side of the planet, a studio looked at the world and decided to make something beautiful anyway. A guy dreaming of home, a girl seeking a new one. And the tragedy is that we needed reminding at all.